Hello, I'm taking on a challenge to beat every playable Nintendo published game. Welcome to the next episode. The next game is Kung Fu. We've got a bit of an interesting one this time around. This game is another port of an arcade title, but this time the original arcade machine, Kung Fu Master, was not developed by Nintendo at all. The original developers of the game were Irem, a Japanese company we'll see more of in the future. Kung Fu Master, also known as Spartan X in Japan, was a big hit for Irem, doing well in both Japan and in international markets. The game is a side-scrolling beat-em-up, and it is generally considered to be the very first game in the genre. While Irem made the arcade version, the NES port was developed entirely by Nintendo, which is not something we see Nintendo do very often. The project was led by Miyamoto, who had a growing interest in side-scrolling games. While Nintendo doesn't reference this game a whole lot nowadays, since they don't actually own the IP, the game did pretty well, selling over 3 million copies on the system. The story of this one is explained in the manual. You are playing as a man named Thomas, and you are trying to rescue a woman named Sylvia from the mysterious gang known as X. She is held captive at the top of their castle, and each floor features a unique boss. On that note, while it is hard to find exactly where the term started, the manual for Kung Fu was one of the first games to use the term boss to refer to harder enemies like this. Since this game is about fighting against a gang, this term is likely being used similar to how boss is used to refer to the leader of a gang. I've never actually played this one before, so let's see how well it holds up. Upon booting the game, we can see 4 options. There are 2 game modes, as well as single player and 2-player options for each. Modes A and B are basically just difficulty settings, so I focused on the single player version of Mode A. After selecting the option, you are thrown straight into the castle. Almost immediately, I started getting attacked by a bunch of guys in pink. These guys are apparently called grippers, and their only attack is to run up to you and grab you. If you let them get up close to you, they will start draining your health, but they are super weak and can be beaten with a single attack. The main 2 ways to attack are by punching and kicking. The punches don't go out quite as far, but I think they come out faster. There's also ducking versions of these attacks which hit down lower, and the lower kicks are notably faster than the standing kicks. Finally, you can jump kick, although I didn't use this move all that often. For these pink guys, it largely comes down to timing. You must hit them at just the right time before they reach you. Sometimes they swarm you from both sides too, so while these guys are normally pretty easy, once you start combining them with other enemies, they can still become a problem. For this first level, my objective was to move from the right to the left, although the direction you travel changes with each level. After making some progress, I ran into a new enemy. These blue guys throw knives at you and are aptly named knife throwers. To dodge these knives, you have to either duck beneath them or jump over them, depending on where they are thrown. Getting hit by them does a bunch of damage too. These guys often caused a lot of problems, since you had to actually get close to them to take them out, and they take more than one hit to defeat. Seeing these guys was always a concern, especially with how hectic things could get. I lost a bunch of my health to this first one, but I eventually defeated him and kept going. After a bit more time, I ran into the boss of the first stage, who was simply named Stick Fighter. This guy wields a giant stick that he swings at you. When I first got to him, there were still a few enemies on the screen, and I pretty quickly got sniped by a knife guy from behind and lost my first life. I didn't get to see it all that much in this run, but this game features a health bar for the bosses too, and I did manage to take out a good chunk of his health with a couple of the kicks that I landed. When you lose a life, you are taken back to the beginning of the stage, which means it's pretty important in this one to maintain as much of your life as possible before you encounter each boss. In my second run, I managed to clear out all the enemies around the boss this time, so it was time for a real 1v1 showdown. I didn't arrive with a ton of health though, and this guy loves to spam his stick at you. I brought his health down pretty low, but I just kept getting hit by that stick and I lost another life. Finally, on the next run, I was able to get enough hits on him that I barely managed to squeeze out a victory. I only had a sliver of health remaining, but thankfully I was at the end of the stage, and your health gets refilled before each floor. My eventual strat for this guy was to arrive with enough health and just spam low kicks at him. This isn't 100% foolproof, but it was usually enough to get me through the level with ease. You start this game with only 3 lives, so unfortunately for this run, I already only had 1 life left, and I was only on level 2. Yikes. The first half of floor 2 was totally different. A bunch of objects are falling from the ceiling, and, depending on their appearance, they behave a bit differently if you don't destroy them quick enough. One of these objects causes a dragon to spawn, who simply just breathes some fire and then leaves, and another one of these objects causes a snake to spawn that runs along the ground. You can destroy the objects before they hit the ground, but it was also pretty easy to just dodge the enemies and wait for them to leave the screen. The final type of object, the confetti ball, floats in the air a bit and then explodes into tiny bits that you must avoid. I took a decent amount of damage here, but I made it to the second half of the level, which just throws a bunch of enemies at you again. Here, I briefly saw a new enemy, a Tom Tom, but I defeated him so quickly, I'm not even really sure I noticed him. Eventually, I ran into the second boss, the Boomerang Fighter. After ducking a few of his throws, I was able to get a ton of ducking kicks in on him, and I beat him with ease. Wow, that was way easier than the first guy. You can actually throw the boomerang downwards, which is a bit more tough since you actually have to jump over it, so he wasn't always quite this easy in future runs. Somehow though, I had managed to beat floor 2 without losing a single life. Nice. After this, we see a brief cutscene of Sylvia calling for you to rescue her. In level 3, I got to see more of those Tom-Tom enemies I mentioned earlier. I don't know if the gang is sending little children at you or what, but these guys are short and require you to duck to actually hit them, although sometimes they pull out a crazy move and jump on top of you. I ended up losing a bunch of health to the knife guys on this stage, but I did manage to make it to the boss. This big dude is known simply as Giant. After getting a single kick on the guy, he let out a kick of his own and I was knocked out. He lets out a huge smile when he does this move too, resulting in a pretty incredible freeze frame for my loss. Thankfully, I had earned enough points to get another life, so I was given one more shot at this stage. I once again got to the boss with really low health, and he got me with another one of those powerful kicks. At least this time I realized that a jump kick takes out half of his entire health though. After getting a game over, it was back to the beginning for me. On my next run, I got to this stage again, but man, this guy was brutal. He's definitely harder than the first 2 bosses. I got clobbered by him again and lost another run. During my 3rd run, I lost this sad life to the boomerang guy, where I managed to defeat him, but I got hit by his boomerang as it was flying back to me. Later on during this run, I managed to reach Giant with full health, but it was still not enough. Yeesh. Each of his attacks just do so much damage. I ended up losing my last life to a knife guy, and this run was over too. Finally, on the next run, I found a strategy that worked pretty well. I started with a jump kick, then followed up with a bunch of punches to his gut. If he does a punch, this works every time since I will duck below it. If he does a kick, he will still hit you, but as long as you have enough health, you will survive and win. Finally, it was time to take on stage 4. This one was pretty tough. It once again opens with a unique section. This time, a bunch of bugs are flying in from holes in the wall, and these things are brutal. They spawn endlessly, and their hitboxes are so small that it's often hard to hit them. While I did eventually get good at this section, I often lost a lot of health here, which was not good for the boss. Speaking of, the boss of this level was the Black Magician. He can teleport, summon dragons, and shoot fireballs. Apparently, he can even grow back parts of his body, as punching him in the face causes his head to fly off, and he will grow back another one. The first time I fought him, I couldn't even figure out how to hit the guy. Low kicks did absolutely nothing, and punching his head off didn't make him lose any health either. Eventually, I figured out that punching him while ducking was the way to damage him, but even then, this guy was just so tough. He spammed so many attacks at you that sometimes his move just seemed impossible to dodge. Maybe there's a safer strat or something, but my eventual strategy was just to get to him with enough health, spam attacks at him, and hope I got lucky. I lost a handful of runs to this guy, but eventually I finally beat him with no lives remaining. This meant I could move on to the final level, but if I failed once, it was all over. The final stage itself was actually not all that bad. It just sent a bunch of the same 3 enemy types at you, so no annoying tricks this time around. Eventually, I reached the final boss with 2/3 of my health still remaining. Time to face off against the leader of the gang, Mr. X. Luckily for me, this boss is a pretty easy cheese trap. If you just duck and spam kicks, he will rarely move close enough to you to do any of his attacks. He did get a couple of kicks on me, but with a sliver of health remaining, I was able to beat him using this strategy on my first try. Phew, I barely made it. After this, I found Sylvia, and after freeing her, Sylvia and Thomas embrace with a bunch of hearts surrounding them. The game congratulates me, but of course this game has to make you loop back to the beginning, so the ending screen immediately tells you that their happiness does not continue for long, and she gets captured once again. What a terrible endless cycle these two are stuck in. I did try to see how much further I could go, but after dying to a knife guy on stage 3, my run ended and my time with Kung Fu was complete. On to the review. I was pleasantly surprised by this one. I'm normally not all that into beat 'em ups, but I enjoyed how fast-paced this game was. There's always a ton of action, and I like the approach of enemies that are defeated in one hit, but require a bunch of quick thinking and well-timed attacks. While the bosses are novel for the time, they are definitely a bit rough around the edges. Often, the best strategies seem to be to just tank them and try to defeat them before they defeated you. This isn't really my favorite type of boss, although I'll cut them some slack for being one of the first games to have bosses like this. There's not a ton of depth to this game, but it was still a good time, so I gave it a 7 out of 10. It's a shame that since Nintendo doesn't fully own the rights to this one, we've never gotten to see it on future consoles through services like the eShop. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to see more of these in the future, make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you won't miss out on the next one. Also leave a like if you enjoyed it, since it will help the channel grow and motivate me to continue this series. I hope I will see you in the next step of my quest to beat every Nintendo game.